We're going to try to cut straight through all the noise, the overwhelming narrative that surrounds China's massive transformation.
There is a lot of noise.
So much. So we're going deep into the stack of sources you provided to really understand the fundamental grinding tension that I think truly defines this modern era.
Which is?
It's the collision, right? The collision between this soaring, almost explosive individual ambition and the entrenched, highly sophisticated authoritarian control that's trying to manage it.
And we really have to stress the word massive when we talk about this transformation. It isn't just large, it's entirely unprecedented in human history.
Unprecedented.
Yeah. One of our sources provides just a stunning piece of perspective on this. It describes the shift as, get this, 100 times the scale and 10 times the speed of the first industrial revolution.
100 times the scale, 10 times the speed. Just try to wrap your head around that acceleration. It's almost impossible.
It really is.
That comparison, it immediately grounds the conversation for me. It means we're not just discussing, economic policy. We are talking about a total societal re-engineering.
And one that happened in the span of a single generation.
Exactly. I mean, look at the material leap alone. If you go back to 1976, near the end of the Maoist era, life was materially...
Well, it was bleak. It was incredibly bleak. But today, the average citizen eats 6 times as much meat as they did back then. I mean, that's a literal physical transformation of the population.
I think you can put a number on that?
Oh, absolutely. The average income, which was a paltry $200 in 1978, had jumped to really remarkable $6,000 by 2014. That level of rapid, widespread wealth accumulation it's almost impossible to fully grasp.
And that hunger, that drive for a better, more material life, it fueled more than just better nutrition, didn't it? It fueled this insatiable global appetite.
Totally. China is now the world's largest consumer of almost everything. Energy, movies, beer, platinum, you name it. They aren't just catching up anymore.
No, they're setting the global pace.
And they're also building infrastructure at a scale the world has just never seen. They're constructing more high-speed rail lines and more airports than the rest of the world combined.
More than everyone else put together.
Exactly. So this isn't just, domestic growth. This is a comprehensive global reorientation of political, economic, and industrial power.
This massive material accumulation, it corresponds directly to a fundamental change in Chinese identity. For visitors, say, 2 generations ago, the defining feature was the sameness.
Right, the Emperor of the Blue Ants.
The Emperor of the Blue Ants, where everyone wore those matching cotton suits, and the national narrative was so strictly defined by collective sacrifice and uniformity.
And now that single national story is, as one source put it, splintering into a billion stories.
A billion stories.
The collective consciousness has just fractured, and we're now firmly in what the sources call the age of the changeling.
Explain that, the change.
This is the era where the daughter of an impoverished farmer can use her ambition, her education, to propel herself from the factory assembly line straight into the boardroom.
And sometimes in just a decade.
Sometimes in less than a decade. It's that rapid.
And that transition from the collective screw in the machine to the ambitious changeling, that's really what we're exploring today. How did that individual plunge into ambition even begin? And how has the party tried to control the very forces it unleashed?
Okay. So let's unpack where this all really started. The conventional narrative often points to Beijing, to these big party mandates handed down from above.
Right, the top-down model.
Exactly. But our sources make a really powerful argument that the birth of this economic freedom was surprisingly grassroots. It started with what one description called the germ in the henhouse.
I love that phrase. Yeah. And it takes us back to the Zhaogang Pact of 1978. This was happening in this deeply impoverished inland village where farmers were still suffering under the deprivation of Mao's collective vision.
How bad was it? Things were so bad that they had been reduced to begging on the streets to survive. So this was an act of pure, desperate defiance. 18 farmers, they secretly gathered in a hut, and in the middle of the night, they divided up the communal land.
And the crucial part here is the risk, the incredible risk they took. They weren't just dividing up some dirt,
Not at all.
They were acknowledging that what they were doing, selling what they grew beyond the state quota, was, in the eyes of the party, an act of counter-revolution.
A huge one. And they signed a secret pact, an agreement to protect one another's families, promising to raise the children of any man who might be arrested for, and this is the official charge, digging up the cornerstone of socialism.
Digging up the cornerstone of socialism. That phrase alone just highlights the true political danger of seeking individual gain at that time.
Oh, absolutely. But the results. The results made that risk irresistible. By the very next year, those 18 families were earning nearly 20 times the income they had been making under the old collective system.
20 times.
20. That immediate visible success was it was too potent to ignore. It was proof of concept.
So that idea, the return to household farming, where you kept the spoils of your own labor,
Yeah.
it just spread with astonishing speed.
It was exactly like a germ in a henhouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
It infected entire counties seemingly overnight. And people weren't just richer, They felt this profound sense of liberation.
A release.
A total release. They use the term songbang. Now, this is a loaded word. It's usually reserved for a liberated prisoner or maybe an animal that's been unfettered and is now free to move and act.
So it's not just about money.
Not at all. The term encapsulates the feeling they were unfettered. The state had, whether they meant to or not, given them permission to breathe again and to pursue their own livelihood.
But this
Yeah.
incredible economic liberation, it immediately slams right into a political ceiling. And that ceiling was defined by Deng Xiaoping himself.
And that's the central paradox that defines modern China, isn't it? Deng wanted wealth creation, he absolutely needed it, but he never, ever intended for that freedom to spill over into the political sphere.
So in March 1979,
Right, in March 1979, he explicitly issues limits on this new sense of songbang. He forbade what he called individualist democracy and made it crystal clear that the ability to emancipate the mind had very strict boundaries.
so the message was basically, get rich, innovate, be ambitious, but do not question the authority structure that allowed you to get rich in the first place.
Exactly. It's a delicate, almost impossible balance to try and maintain. You're fueling ambition while simultaneously demanding total obedience.
And the raw power of that new ambition it's perfectly encapsulated in the almost cinematic story of Lin Zengyi in that same year, 1979.
What an incredible story. This man literally risked being shot on sight just to stake a claim on what he believed China could become.
So Lin Zeng was a Taiwanese company commander, and he chose to defect from Taiwan to the mainland.
Which at the time was an act of, extreme idealism. You have to remember Taiwan was still under martial law, and any soldier attempting to flee to the PRC was under intense scrutiny.
But Lin, he believed with this incredible conviction that China would prosper again, and he wanted to be part of that resurgence.
And to really understand the level of commitment here, you need to know the countermeasures Taiwan was employing at the time. The army had destroyed most of the local fishing boats and any object that might be used as a flotation device.
Like what?
This is the amazing part. Seemingly innocuous items like basketballs and bicycle tires, they had to be registered like military equipment.
To stop people from using them to float across the strait.
Exactly. That single detail just paints this incredible picture of intense political paranoia.
And Lin's escape itself wasn't just luck. It was a tactical masterpiece.
Oh, not at all. He studied the local tide charts. He calculated precisely when he needed to enter the water before low tide, around 10 p.m., to make sure the current would carry him swiftly away from the coastal patrols.
But the real genius, I think, was in the psychological planning he used to deter the sentries guarding the shoreline.
This is the truly fascinating part. Before he made his break, he casually visited the sentry posts, and he told the young recruits an odd joke, rooted in local folklore.
He killed them.
He told them that if they saw any mysterious night swimmers, they shouldn't bother shooting them because they were probably just water spirits.
Wow.
And, given the widespread superstitions prevalent in that era, an offhand comment from a high-ranking commander, it might have been just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Enough to deter a nervous teenager from raising an alarm in the dark.
That's incredible. So once he makes it to the mainland, this act of self-determination continues, but in a really unexpected way. He immediately rejects the system that usually claimed defectors, right?
He does. He explicitly asks the People's Liberation Army not to publicize his story for propaganda purposes. He refused to become the smiling face on some defector brochure.
And then, critically, he changes his name.
Right. He changes his name from Lin Zhengde to Lin Yifu.
And the significance of that new name, it's profound.
It is. Lin Yifu means a persistent man on a long journey. It symbolizes a radical act of personal choice in a culture that was historically suspicious of that kind of individualism.
He's rejecting the entire collective narrative.
The entire thing. He's rejecting the hero's purpose being to serve the party machine, a culture that had championed figures like Lei Feng, who famously called himself a tiny screw in the revolutionary mechanism. Lin Yifu's new identity proclaimed a long, persistent journey defined by his choices, not the collectives.
It's an early perfect example of the changeling forging their own path.
So that early defiance, both the economic defiance of the farmers and the political and personal defiance of someone like Lin Yifu, it really opened the floodgates.
And the next era was defined by the cultural and personal plunge. If spare time belonged entirely to the state in Mao's day, by the 1990s, moonlighting had become so ubiquitous that it fueled a massive booming industry in printing business cards.
It sounds trivial, but it's not. Everyone needed to define their new multiple identities. That shift from a monolithic identity to a marketized professional self-image is absolutely critical. And the state media itself, it recognized the change and adapted its messaging.
They stopped promoting the idea of being a rustless screw.
They did. And instead, they pushed these aggressive new slogans of individualism. You must rely on yourself and blaze your own path and fight.
This cultural shift, it validated ambition. It gave people permission to be selfish, even aggressively so. But here's where we have to look at the dark side of that sudden, unfettered freedom.
Right, the profound lack of ethical and regulatory structures to manage that ambition.
Exactly. That's the dark side of self-reliance. When economic gain becomes the only defining truth, desperation meets exploitation with just terrible results.
And we see this in the horrifying example of the door-to-door blood buyers in poor, often inland areas.
The image from the source material is incredibly visceral. People were so desperate for cash, they were donating constantly. But once they reached their physical limit for donation, the contractors, these still demanded more.
And to maximize the yield, these contractors would resort to these extreme measures. They would physically hang people upside down by their feet against a wall to literally draw the blood down into their arms more quickly.
It's just barbaric.
It is. And this complete lack of hygiene, the lack of regulatory oversight, combined with this extreme desperation for money, it ultimately led to China's worst outbreak of HIV by the mid-90s.
It's just a stark reminder that economic opportunity without any kind of ethical or regulatory restraint,
Yeah.
it just creates conditions of extreme human vulnerability.
It does.
And that tragic anecdote, it perfectly illustrates the moral cost of the economic tide. But the cultural embrace of me was undeniable, even in pop culture,
Yeah,
right?
completely. The old collective songs like We Are the Heirs of Communism were just swept away, replaced by the beautiful, once forbidden music of the Taiwanese singer Deng Lijun.
And her song The Moon represents my heart.
It was a massive cultural phenomenon precisely because it shifted the focus entirely inward. It was about me, my heart, a direct rejection of the mandatory collective sentimentality.
And corporations immediately jumped on that. This new generation didn't want the state to dictate their identity. They wanted ownership.
Which is how you get China Mobile's slogan for its younger clientele. My turf, my decision. It's an absolute embrace of sovereignty over one's own life.
That embrace of sovereignty reached its ultimate, almost exaggerated expression in the 2008 pep rally, where students recited a pledge that was a total reversal of the Maoist ideal.
I love this detail. They chanted, "I am the biggest miracle of nature."
I am the biggest miracle of nature. Imagine that statement being said in 1958 versus 2008. The cultural distance covered is it's staggering.
It really is.
And this overwhelming embrace of personal choice inevitably revolutionized something deeply traditional and highly political: the marriage market.
A huge change. We're talking about a centuries-long tradition of arranged marriages based on mendeng hudui, or family doors of equal size.
Which means comparable social and economic status.
Exactly. And that tradition had these deep local customs reinforcing it. Anthropologists studying villages found that there was a required ritual for the bride. She had to sob convincingly when leaving home on her wedding day. It was a sign of filial piety and dutiful sorrow.
I remember the incredible anecdote about the bride who was actually happy to be marrying her choice.
Yes, the anthropologist Yan Yongxiang, he recounted attending a wedding where the bride was genuinely marrying for love. But because the custom demanded a show of tears, she had to rub hot pepper on her handkerchief to summon the expected sorrow.
That's an incredibly powerful image for the weight of tradition.
It is.
But this system of arranged or status-based marriage was increasingly rejected by the new middle-income stratum, particularly educated women who were moving to the cities to work, like Gan Haiyan.
Gan Haiyan was a highly educated migrant with a graduate degree, yet she found herself totally marginalized in the city. She was categorized as one of the 3 species trying to survive in the marriage market.
Which were?
Men, women, and women with graduate degrees.
Wow.
Yeah. Chinese men were often wary of women who had surpassed them educationally, and her migrant status, constrained by the hupi system, severely limited her social circle.
And her frustration quickly turned into, well, into entrepreneurial rage.
It did. She paid to use an early online dating service only to find it was full of fake bachelors. When she complained, the company told her, "Look at yourself, you're ugly and you go after these high-quality men."
That insult, coupled with the systemic fraud, made her so angry that she founded G1.
Which quickly became China's biggest dating site. And her service created what I find to be one of the most interesting societal paradoxes of the era, the paradox of choice.
Explain that.
In a country of 1.3 billion people, online dating promised, infinite possibilities. But in practice, it often led to a frantic narrowing of options.
It's the ultimate hyperfiltering system. You have 400,000 potential male users in Beijing, for example.
But a 23-year-old woman uses filters for height, blood type, and even zodiac sign to cut that massive pool down to a hyper-specific group of only 83 men.
So choice didn't lead to expansion. It led to an exhausting, almost algorithmic search for perfection.
Exactly. And this filtering fed into the mother-in-law syndrome, where families of sons were forced into these escalating displays of wealth building ever larger and more expensive houses, specifically to attract better matches. They saw a house as the concrete representation of man's dignity.
Yet, despite all this newfound personal freedom, these deep-seated structural controls remained in place. And we see this friction most clearly in the enduring power of the hukou system.
The residency permit system, the hukou, has a long history as a means of population control. It was originally intended to limit rural migration to cities.
And even after the economic reform.
And remained incredibly powerful, frustrating choice and reinforcing institutionalized inequality.
So for migrants who moved to cities like Gonghaian, the hukou system meant they were essentially second-class citizens when it came to basic services.
Absolutely. They couldn't access quality healthcare, and crucially, their children couldn't access decent education without paying these massive premiums.
How massive?
A migrant parent could pay 5 or 6 times what a local registered parent paid for schooling. This wasn't just bureaucracy, you see. It was a mechanism ensuring that a truly meritocratic society where ambition could overcome birthright remained an illusion.
So your economic success was not enough to secure true equality of opportunity if you lacked the correct piece of paper.
That's the barrier. That structural barrier is so critical. It shows that even as individual ambition was unfettered, the political apparatus held firm on who truly belonged and who deserved full access to the nation's rising wealth. The scale and the speed of the economic rush meant that many technocrats, emboldened by their success, they began to operate under the assumption that development is the only hard truth.
The ends justify the means.
Completely. They believed they could sacrifice safety, oversight, anything in the name of progress.
And that brings us to the railway boss, who just embodied that ruthless approach, Liu Zhizhen. He was nicknamed Great Leap Liu.
But his colleagues, they sometimes called him Lunatic Liu.
Not a glowing review.
Not at all. Liu was the definition of the velocity trap. As the driver of China's high-speed rail construction, he believed that to achieve his massive targets, a generation must be sacrificed. His ambition, combined with the virtually unsupervised nature of the powerful railway ministry, meant that haste always trumped caution and safety.
And the cost of that speed became lethally clear with the Wenzhou high-speed rail disaster in 2011.
A full year had been aggressively slashed from the construction schedule for the critical Beijing-Shanghai line, and when the system failed, 40 people were killed and 192 were injured.
What went wrong?
The official report later detailed the systemic failures, severe design flaws, neglect of safety management, and a pervasive pressure to ignore problems. But the most alarming detail was that staff chose to ignore the simplest solution.
Which was?
Stopping the trains. They ignored it because they feared retribution or losing bonuses due to delays more than they feared a catastrophe. An engineer lamented that the entire process, from beginning to end, was so compressed it was impossible to pinpoint any single point of failure. The whole system was flawed by design.
The government's immediate response was predictable. Very old school.
Oh, yeah. The Central Propaganda Department issued a command to all editors to minimize attention. Do not question, do not elaborate. They tried to bury the story, literally ordering the wreckage to be buried on site.
But this wasn't the 1980s anymore.
Not even close. This was a newly wired age, and the public's instantaneous demand for accountability, amplified by millions of new internet users, was just overwhelming. The disaster couldn't be buried.
And the crash didn't just expose technical flaws. It exposed the true corrosive scale of graft that was underpinning the entire system.
Right. Liu Xiaoran was eventually expelled for severe violations of discipline, accused of taking $152 million in bribes. But his undoing was made public through the sheer absurdity of his private life.
The mistresses.
The ministry reports alleged he maintained 18 mistresses, turning him into a symbol of moral decay. And when a colleague was asked if the mistress story was true, their telling response was this cynical deflection. What is your definition of a mistress?
Wow. That question, that just highlights the extent to which ethical standards had completely dissolved among the elite.
It signals a complete lack of shame, doesn't it? It confirms this wasn't just individual theft, it was institutionalized corruption.
The whole system was built on it.
Precisely. We see the phenomenon of Maiguan literally to buy a government promotion, where positions were sold with established prices, almost like items on a restaurant menu. In one town, the post of chief planner was known to sell for $103,000.
And that created an entire ecosystem dependent on graft.
It did, and the physical evidence of this corruption was everywhere.
Like the gift shops.
Exactly. Mao Yuxi, a liberal economist, observed the headquarters of the powerful National Development and Reform Commission, the body that essentially controls the nation's finances. The building was surrounded by high-end gift shops.
So what was happening?
Corrupt officials would arrive carrying bags of luxury bribes, expensive Mutai liquor, rare porcelain. And then cadres leaving work at the end of the day would sell the gifts right back to the shops for cash. It created this continuous feedback loop of graft flowing in and out of the most powerful ministries.
This rot was happening just as the internet was becoming the new political battlefield, challenging the Central Propaganda Department's authority to maintain the official narrative.
The party learned very quickly that online sentiment was difficult, if not impossible, to control. President Jiang Zemin had identified the internet early on, back in 2001, as a political, ideological, and cultural battlefield.
But the surge in information and the speed of communication were just. They were too vast for the old censorship models.
And authenticity became the rarest, most prized asset. The public developed a very sharp nose for hypocrisy.
The slightest slip-up by the state, or by anyone claiming to represent the state, was instantly scrutinized and amplified.
We saw this with the Sanlu milk scandal, where melamine was added to save costs, poisoning infants. Or the exposure of the low-income family mother on state TV, who was quickly revealed to be a civil servant with vacation photos. It instantly eroded public trust in any official narrative.
And this environment of lost trust created the perfect conditions for satire to flourish, which is where we get the brilliant viral campaign of the grass mud horse.
A masterpiece of digital defiance.
So detail this for us, because it's just amazing.
In 2009, when authorities launched this massive campaign against online vulgarity and started blocking certain keywords, citizens responded by inventing a mythical creature, an alpaca-like animal, whose name Cow Nima was a homonym for an extreme common profanity.
Right.
The absurdity of it allowed them to discuss the forbidden term while technically only discussing a fluffy, fictional animal.
The brilliance is that it forced censors into this impossible position.
Yeah.
How do you censor an animal?
Exactly. It forced the authorities to create an ever-expanding glossary of taboo terms just to keep up with the ingenuity of digital dissent. The public was constantly finding new ways to weaponize language against control.
And then there's Han Han, the 26-year-old writer and race car driver who used his blog to channel all this skepticism and cynicism into mainstream critique.
Han Han was the powerful spokesman for the disillusioned post-80s and post-90s youth. His style was just direct and uncompromisingly anti-hypocrisy.
I remember his quote about the Rolls-Royce.
He famously argued against cheering these headlines of prosperity when a worker's low-wage labor adds up to nothing but a single screw in the boss's Rolls-Royce. He wasn't advocating for abstract political systems. He was focused on palpable injustice and the unfair distribution of the spoils.
And his massive popularity showed that a new generation valued honesty and authenticity above all the party's carefully curated narratives.
So the rapid accumulation of all this material wealth, coupled with the collapse of the collective systems and the exposure of this deep-seated corruption, it left a profound vacuum in the nation's purpose.
The spiritual void.
Exactly. The Jingxin Kongsu. The old belief system of Maoism had been deliberately destroyed during the Cultural Revolution and the Economic Revolution. Well, it failed to replace it with any defining sense of purpose beyond simple material gain.
So the state achieves its economic goals, but in the process, creates a crisis of meaning for the individual.
A massive one. And the party recognized this gap. They attempted to fill it by rehabilitating Confucius, an indigenous moral icon.
The attempt was highly ironic, though, wasn't it?
Oh, deeply ironic. They were using modern marketing and PR techniques to resurrect a philosopher whose temples and teachings had been violently destroyed by the Red Guards just a few decades earlier.
So this attempt to repackage morality felt deeply cynical to a lot of people.
It did. We saw this in the Confucius Temple performances, run by a former propaganda official who even used his crosstalk comedy skills, a very modern, almost vaudeville approach to market the classics.
But that official revival felt forced and hollow.
Especially when compared to the tragic history of that very temple, where the writer Lao, she was beaten by Red Guards before he tragically took his own life nearby. The spiritual replacement felt like a public relations stunt.
And this unmet spiritual need also fueled a massive organic explosion of faith outside of state control.
A huge one. We saw the ranks of Christians swell dramatically, reaching an estimated 60 to 80 million members. That's a community nearly as large as the Communist Party itself.
And this pursuit of faith, it offered a moral compass, an anchor that the rapidly changing secular society just could not provide.
And the conversion was deeply personal, even for those within the legal system, people who were meant to enforce the party's rule.
Right, like the human rights lawyer Li Jianquang.
Absolutely. He noted that his colleagues who converted, they asserted a very clear line. They would obey Caesar, Mao Zedong, the Communist Party, but they would not let them hinder their belief in Jesus.
So faith provided a moral boundary, a private ethical sphere that the state could neither provide nor fully penetrate.
Precisely.
However, the greatest shock, confirming the chilling erosion of social ethics, came from the streets, demonstrating the breakdown of basic human compassion, the Little Yu incident.
It's a truly horrifying story. This tragedy in Foshan in October 2011 involved a 2-year-old girl, Little Yu, who was struck by 2 different vehicles, but the true horror was the response of the community.
She was then unbelievably ignored by 18 passers-by who simply walked past her as she lay bleeding in the market alley.
It's a moment of profound national reflection when something like that happens. The immediate public anxiety just confirmed these widespread fears about eroded ethics and the collapse of any sense of collective responsibility.
And that anxiety was fueled by a devastating legal precedent known as the Good Samaritan fear.
Right. The case of Peng Yu in 2006 looms large here. Peng Yu helped an elderly woman who had fallen at a bus stop get to the hospital, only for her to successfully sue him for causing the fall in the first place.
And the judge's verdict, which was based on logical inference rather than actual evidence, was just chilling.
It was. The judge argued that if Peng Yu hadn't caused the fall, he wouldn't have stopped to help.
That decision delivered a crippling blow to social trust. It implicitly told the public that acting charitably was too great a financial and legal risk.
And the subsequent tragedy of Little Yu was the inevitable, brutal confirmation that the social contract had broken down. The one person who finally stopped to help her was an illiterate grandmother who made a living recycling trash.
The anthropologist Zhu Runan analyzed this fear and the resulting ethos, noting that the collective is breaking down and there is simply nothing yet there to replace it.
And that vacuum creates a new, hyper-individualistic mandate, especially among migrants who are far from their home villages. The ethos becomes, take care of yourself, you make a life with your family at its core. It was a self-defense mechanism against a world with no safety net and no guarantee of justice or compassion.
And this existential fear, this moral decay, it occurred amidst incredible wealth generation, which brings us to the stark financial reality, inequality. The economic boon was a success, but the spoils were just wildly unbalanced.
The gap between rich and poor ballooned so quickly that the government actually stopped publishing the Gini coefficient, the standard measure of income inequality, for several years.
Their excuse was that the wealthy hid too much income.
Right. But independent calculations, however, place the coefficient as high as 0.61.
And a 0.61 Gini coefficient is extraordinarily high. That's a level often associated with deeply unstable or oligarchical states. For context, that level of inequality was found to be higher than in Zimbabwe at the time.
It revealed that the promise, that allowing some to get rich first would eventually benefit everyone, that promise was failing dramatically.
And the inequality wasn't just about income, it was about the opportunity gap.
That's the deep irony. In this supposedly meritocratic era of ambition, parental connections, not education or raw talent, were the decisive factors for a child's earning potential.
That is the critical finding that just shatters the entire mythos of the changeling. If success depends on who your parents know, not what you achieve, then meritocracy is dead.
It is. Urban China was ranked among the least socially mobile places in the world. The individualistic ambition that drove the economic miracle was now trapped beneath an oligarchic reality, where generational connections determined your fate.
Which brings us to the ultimate anti-hero of this era, Cheng Yan, the paper magnate. She was publicly accused of turning blood into gold due to harsh labor practices in her factories.
Cheng Yan became the unapologetic face of hard-charging, unfettered capitalism. She was criticized for punishing workers for minor infractions, but she defended her practices by saying, with total clarity, if you don't impose fines, workers are not careful and they will get injured.
No apology at all.
None. Her comments and her single-minded focus on production completed her transformation in the public eye from a symbol of entrepreneurial success to the stark embodiment of the moral cost of wealth.
So in a society that institutionalized control and normalized corruption, the most powerful political statements were inevitably these personal acts of defiance, acts taken by people who had nothing left to lose but their dignity.
Absolutely. And no story embodies this intersection of personal ambition and political risk better than that of the blind lawyer Chen Guangcheng.
Chen was a peasant lawyer, entirely self-taught, who became an activist by collecting thousands of detailed accounts of forced abortions and sterilizations by local officials who were ruthlessly enforcing the one-child policy.
And his work challenged the state not on abstract ideology, but on law and human rights. He was demanding that the government obey its own rules.
And after he helped women file a massive class action suit, he was locked in his own home under constant surveillance. The source materials suggest he was just mystified that his attempts to alert the central government to local abuses had led to his own seclusion.
The absurdity of being jailed for demanding legal compliance drove him, and his communication breakthrough was pure accident. During a routine power outage in his village, the jamming equipment isolating his phone failed for a moment.
And he got a call out.
He got a call out, and he articulated the key uncertainty that worried every single Chinese citizen. He didn't focus on his own suffering. He focused on the system's failure. He declared, "I want to tell the whole world that this local government doesn't obey their own law."
And then came the profound question that cut right to the core of the paradox.
He asked, "I'm only wondering if the central government doesn't want to stop this, or doesn't have the ability to stop this. Was the failure intentional control, or was it institutional impotence?"
And that question galvanized ordinary tech-savvy citizens.
It did. His isolation led to arguably China's first mass-scale viral political campaign. Ordinary people across the country posted photos of themselves online wearing sunglasses, a direct, nonviolent reference to his blindness and house arrest.
It was a collective, non-official challenge to the system that couldn't easily be censored because it was based on an image, not a word.
This collective action of defiance leads us directly to Liu Xiaobo, the writer who sought to redefine the political terms entirely. His work culminated in Charter 08.
Which was a manifesto calling for 19 fundamental political reforms, including elections and independent courts.
And what made Charter 08 a true threat, unlike past dissident movements, was its intentional moderation. The author specifically called for gradual change, hoping to appeal to ordinary people who feared instability above all else. They wanted to move beyond the marginalized intellectual circles.
It was a measured, reasonable proposal for the country to mature politically.
Yes. But the party's reaction demonstrated exactly how seriously they viewed the threat of organized, measured ideas.
Liu's punishment was severe. He was indicted for incitement to subvert state power.
And the evidence they used was based on precisely 7 carefully chosen sentences from his extensive writings. He became a symbol of the crime of words, the idea that thought itself could destabilize the state.
And when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, the state media response was a masterclass in propaganda and denial.
They blacked out the news entirely. On the rare occasions the state even mentioned him, they portrayed him as a sybarite, a collector of fine wines and porcelain who earned his living bad-mouthing his own country.
And the resulting image of the empty blue chair at the Oslo ceremony became this powerful, immediate symbol of the state's fear.
It did, and the empty chair quickly became the new internet blackout term.
Finally, we turn to Ai Weiwei, the artist who proved that you don't need a formal job to be fired from to challenge the state's monopoly on truth.
Ai Weiwei's background gave him a unique vantage point. He'd spent years abroad, was influenced by figures like Duchamp, and returned with a highly individualistic, performative approach to both art and activism.
And his pivotal moment of activism was deeply personal and moral. the aftermath of the 2008 Sichuan earthquake.
His fixation was simple but devastating. The government's refusal to count or name the students who died when their shoddily constructed schools collapsed. We know that due to siphoned funds and systemic corruption, designs that called for steel were built with bamboo instead.
And AYY's simple, insistent demand was
Who's dead? What are their names?
that question. It connects him directly to the coal miner's son, Michael we'll discuss shortly. It wasn't abstract political theory. It was a demand for dignity, for recognition of the individual life.
He used his art and his celebrity to challenge power, whether it was the shovel violin or the ambitious Documenta 12 fairy tale project, where he sent 1,001 ordinary Chinese citizens to Germany, a mass act of cultural exchange aimed at breaking down official barriers. He forced the system to respond to him.
But there is a massive price for that attention. The details of his 2011 detention are truly disturbing. They illustrate the lengths the state will go to maintain psychological control.
He was held in a padded, windowless room in a military compound, subjected to sensory deprivation and constant, relentless scrutiny. He was guarded by soldiers sitting just 4 inches from his face, day and night.
He had to sleep with his hands in view.
And he had to ask permission even to touch his own face. It was a total erasure of personal autonomy.
And upon his release, the state tried to control the narrative of his health to refute any torture rumors.
They ordered him to say he was in good health and being investigated only for economic crimes. But the spectacle of an artist challenging authority with simple demands for truth, it galvanized international attention. His persistence proved that the ambition for truth, for recognition, was as powerful and enduring as the ambition for fortune. Following the rise of digital dissent and all this public scrutiny over corruption, the party initiated a major political recalibration under Xi Jinping. They looked very closely at history, specifically at the Soviet collapse.
Right. They feared that allowing protests or defiance to go unchecked leads inevitably to open revolt. They clearly feared this single spark effect, especially after seeing the Arab Spring unfold.
That political recalibration was visible to everyone in the 2012 18th Party Congress lineup. Political reliability was clearly paramount, often trumping competence. 4 out of the 7 men elevated to the Politburo Standing Committee were members of aristocratic communist families.
The message was clear. Loyalty and bloodline matter more than merit in the post-corruption cleanup.
And their conformity was total. They presented a uniform image. Dark, conservative suits, red ties, and without exception, their hair dyed to the same featureless black sheen. They were a collective front, erasing any hint of individual deviation or thought.
And their stated fears were existential, weren't they? Tying back directly to the failure of the Soviet Union.
President Xi Jinping openly voiced his concern about the Soviet collapse, analyzing it as a failure of conviction. He said, eventually, all it took was a quiet word from Gorbachev. In the end, nobody was man enough to come out and resist.
So they viewed the Soviet collapse as a failure of ideological will.
And they were determined not to repeat it.
This fear led to the development of sophisticated new control tactics aimed specifically at suppressing the spread and repetition of dissenting ideas, the engine of political change.
The most notable example came in 2013 when the Supreme People's Court ruled that any false defamatory comment viewed 5,000 times or forwarded 500 times could result in 3 years in prison.
Think about that threshold. 5,000 views or 500 forwards is tiny in a population that size.
Exactly. The goal was clearly to prevent ideas from gaining critical mass, imposing a massive chilling effect on digital communication.
And the suppression was technological and absolute, demonstrating the party's resources.
In a remarkably short period, they had successfully blocked Facebook, Twitter, the New York Times, and Bloomberg News. They understood that the great ambition they had fostered, the desire for greater knowledge and connection, was also their greatest threat, and they chose control.
But if we zoom back out to the individual, the revolution was never simply about money or abstract political rights. It was ultimately about the pursuit of recognition, the need to be somebody. We should think back to Michael, the coal miner's son.
Michael's personal ambition was to be a great English teacher and write a textbook. His quest wasn't for sheer wealth, it was for lasting recognition and respect. He contrasted his life with his father's, who worked 14-hour days, but whose dead colleagues in the mine were nameless because the official records were classified.
The idea that his father's co-workers could die as invisible individuals, literally unnamed, was mystifying to Michael. It was an offensive notion.
He spent so much time fantasizing about seeing his name on the cover of a book, determined to be somebody. Anonymity and the lack of dignity offended his generation's core beliefs. That impulse connects him directly to the demands of Ai Weiwei, who simply asked for the names of the dead students, and to the persistence of Lin Yufu, who rejected the party's script to name himself.
So this brings us to the concluding paradox of the Age of Ambition. The relentless pursuit of fortune, driven by Deng's reforms, was tremendously successful in relieving deprivation. But it failed to define the ultimate purpose of the nation or the individual. It left the Jingxin Kongsu intact.
The country is unfettered in its economy, free to pursue wealth and define its identity through consumption. But it remains strictly subject to the party in power, which dictates its political and ideological boundaries.
And the long-term risk of this posture, of trying to contain the very forces you rely on.
Well, historically, authoritarian states are fragile. They tend not to grow reliably over the long term, especially when their leaders fear the very innovation, the free flow of information, the questioning of authority that is required for sustained future growth. The party is trapped in a dilemma. It needs new ideas, but it views global ideas and dissent as an existential threat to its survival. The Chinese people have outpaced the political system that nurtured their rise, and that tension remains the defining challenge for the world's most dynamic nation.
So this deep dive shows us a country defined by furious contradictions. China is home to both the creation of bare-handed fortunes and the existence of black jails, a fierce curiosity about the world, and a defensive, rigid pride. The speed and scale of change have been breathtaking, but the moral and political foundation remains unsettled and profoundly tense.
The Chinese have gained everything by iron and sweat and fire, and because they lived through such rapid reversals of fortune and ideology, they know the impermanence of it all, what one might call the unreality of reality. So if the relentless pursuit of wealth and stability has reached its limits and failed to satisfy the spiritual void, will the deeper quest for dignity and values, driven by the unbound feet of ordinary citizens, like the poetry-writing street sweeper Qi Zhangfu, who sought a bigger stage to explore the realm of culture rather than wealth will that determine the future direction of the world's largest, fastest-changing nation?
That's a profound and essential question to consider as we watch this era unfold.